Systemic misogyny persists when silence gives cover to the sins of powerful men. And I've heard a lot of sanctimony here today, a lot of sanctimony. So let's start with the facts. Every political party who has participated in debate today has members who have been silent and given cover for the sins of powerful men. So let's not kid ourselves about that. We don't need another report to provide justice for women in the military. We need courage. And we need to stop the garbage that's happening here. I have been in this place for 10 years, and I have experienced systemic misogyny. I have had my rear end fondled. I have been called every name in the book. And I've watched other women come behind me and have the same experience. I have publicly called out my party when I have had instances come forward or come to light within my own tent, because I've had to. Silence would have then provided cover for the sins of powerful men. We don't need another report. We need courage. Every single party here has had it happen in their own tent. The NDP, the Liberals, the Greens have had an article in the Toronto Star. Enough. I am so tired of listening to people finger point. Really? You're going to blame Stephen Harper? Not a single Liberal backbencher has stood up and said, hey, maybe the defense minister did something wrong. You know, the only way things change is when people have courage to speak up and to demand change within their own tent. I have watched for 6 years, under the watch of this government, quarter be given to the most senior people in government. I have watched at the same relative time as these allegations about General Vance come out, the Prime Minister have unresolved groping allegation. Not a single Liberal has called this out within their own tent. Not one. Not one. And if one wants to stand up today and talk about Prime Minister Harper, to me, they better start by addressing that, which has never been addressed. Then I watched them unceremoniously can the member from Vancouver, Granville, I believe, and Jane Philippot for daring to speak truth to power. Not a single Liberal spoke up for these women speaking truth. Not one. So if a Liberal wants to get up and talk about Prime Minister Harper, they better speak up about that injustice first. Then, of course, we've got the member from Kitchener-Hespeler, I believe, who the Liberals allowed to run for them, knowing that there were substantiated harassment allegations. Not a single Liberal spoke up about that. Not one. So if somebody wants to get up and talk to me about Prime Minister Harper, they better speak out about that. When a similar thing happened in my party, I trotted myself out into the House of Commons and said, no, no more. This has to change. So if somebody wants to ask me about Prime Minister Harper, they better be asking about that. I'm just furious. Can you imagine being a member of the armed forces and watching this debate today? Of course we need to call out the people who are at the highest level of power, because they're the ones who give silence to the sins of powerful men. Come on, don't kid yourself that the Prime Minister's office didn't know about this. It's just ridiculous. And now another report. What we need to be doing is saying no more silence on any political tent, there shouldn't be quarter anywhere. I am tired of having to do the heavy lifting as a woman. It gets really tiring to have to explain to people that, you know what, silence is complicity. And that when you cover it up within your own tent, it tells people that are in your tent that there will be no justice. And that's what's happening with the defense minister right now. Come on, question period after question period. And it was Stephen Harper's fault. Look inwardly. Somebody call it out. Somebody say this can't continue. Every program that you put in place, you can put hundreds of millions of dollars. Ask every Supreme Court justice in the world to do another report. But if silence gives quarters to the sins of powerful men, systemic misogyny persists. I have always put my money where my mouth is on this issue. And I've watched other women in this place do the same. Kudos to Jane Philippot. Kudos to her. She went to the wall for her colleague because she knew she was doing the right thing. But silence is rewarded around here. Silence is rewarded with promotion. You know what's not rewarded? Courage. You know what's rewarded? Covering up stuff like this. Honestly, that's what's rewarded. And that is what's wrong with government, and that's what's wrong with power systems in this country. I cannot believe that we are having a debate where Liberal members who have not once had the courage to publicly speak out in any form, even anonymously, like, hey, I have concerns about the competency of the defense minister, or hey, what about the prime minister's chief of staff? Surely she must have known something. And then to bring in her gender about it. That's disgusting too. Come on. Misogyny knows no gender. There are women who cover up the sins of men with their silence, and we shouldn't give them quarter just because of their gender either. Something happened here over the last 6 years. Evidence upon evidence. You have somebody offering to give a lie detector test. And you know what? A woman who's watching this is in the armed forces today is going, get your act together. I don't need another report. I need safety. And I need people who have covered this up to come to justice. I have a stepdaughter who is serving in the United States Armed Forces, and she is incredible. She inspires me every day. She is watching this debate. She's watching one of her allied countries and literally watching members of parliament go, well, it was some other guy who wasn't here 6 years ago fault. He's not prime minister anymore, okay? He's not prime minister. Somebody else is, and somebody else was in charge of this. To keep deflecting this, to not have a way forward, to not hold people to account, to give quarter to this is everything that is wrong with this system. And it is every reason why systemic misogyny exists. I am tired of having to stand up here and call people to account. It makes me angry, it makes me frustrated, and makes me sad as a Canadian. Honestly, somebody needs to be fired over this. And systems need to be put in place to make sure that it never happens again, that nobody ever gets promoted within a cabinet or within a prime minister's office who knew about this. For now and for forever going forward. Honestly, my party's not perfect. No, we're not. The NDP is not perfect. The Greens not. And the Liberals aren't either. But they are in power today, and they have the power to change things. They are in power. And if they want to show Canadian women that they have any credibility on feminism, any credibility at all, they have to deal with the fact that they are continually and perpetually silent on these issues. Silence every single time. Anytime there's any sort of sexual harassment or misconduct or whatever, it is silence and crickets across their backbench. And that's wrong. And that's what that report is going to tell you. You don't need to pay somebody else to do that or another 5 years. You need change. So I dare somebody to ask me a question right now about Stephen Harper. You better stand up, whoever does that, and say, what the defense minister did right now is wrong, and I stand in solidarity with you across political lines, across partisanship, and stand up for justice for the women in the armed forces and for every woman who suffers from systemic misogyny, from systemic racism in this country. Enough is enough. And if we stand here and keep bickering along partisan lines to keep protecting the people up our food chains, nothing will ever change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the intervention on some level. I, too, am angry about misogyny and sexism, although I find the member's comments incredibly hypocritical given her party's position on a woman's right to choose. My question isn't actually involving Prime Minister Harper. It's her own leader now. She talks about people getting a promotion who knew. What about her own leader? He gets a promotion to become leader, and he knew about these rumors and allegations. And Mr. Speaker, my other question is about why is it always women who have to shoulder the responsibility for the actions of men, the accusations of men, yet this member is advocating to fire a woman for what she supposedly knew or didn't know, yet her own leader, she isn't calling for his resignation for what he knew. Why is it always women shouldering the consequences for the actions of men and the perpetrators of this violence?
Honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, let the record show that the Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Health holds the biggest parliamentary record for missing the point, missing the boat, and lack of courage.
Question commentaire.
Questions and comments?
Hello?
Order.
Order. Order. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Avignon-Lamitis, Matane-Matapédia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech that she delivered with passion, and I fully agree with her. We don't need another report. We just need a bit of courage. And suppose the Liberal government were to fire everyone who's contributing to this misogynist tradition and this culture of silence, I imagine that would be a whole bunch of people leaving. But if they were to do that, what do we do next? What's she proposing as a solution to put an end to this type of conduct or misconduct? The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Clean house, no quarter.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Esquimalt, Saanich Sooke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Calgary Nose Hill, not just for her passionate speech today, but for her standing up for women the whole time I've served together with her in Parliament, and also for her standing up for my own community of those on sexual orientation and gender identity. I do agree that she puts her money where her mouth is. And we may disagree on some details about the motion today. But my question for her is whether she would agree with me that reforms going forward really have little chance of being taken seriously by either survivors or perpetrators if no one pays the price for the silence in 2018.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
He's right.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman. I just asked the honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman. I think just the boom on his mic. There we are. Okay. Good.
Okay. I just want to thank Mr. Speaker, my friend from Calgary Nose Hill, for her impassioned speech. She has been a true champion of fighting misogyny, of fighting discrimination, and fighting against this type of sexual violence. And I want to thank her husband and her stepdaughter for their service in the United States Armed Services. I know that she lives this and understands all too well what needs to be done going forward. And I also know that for whatever reason, people are trying to make an excuse for Katie Telford, who may be very complicit in this cover-up for the past 3 years. And so I just ask my colleague and friend if she can talk about what steps need to be taken now so that women and men can feel safe in the Canadian Armed Forces from being harassed.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
I said it before and I'll say it again. Clean house, no quarter.
Question commentaire.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her very emotional speech, and for a Prime Minister who claims to be a feminist. Imagine what things would be like if he weren't. In this situation of sexual misconduct allegations, there's something that I think is very important that very little is mentioned about, and it's aggravated in the case of General Vance, and it's the abuse of authority that he allegedly committed here with his sexual misconduct. This is a man who's in a situation of authority, and unfortunately, it never should have happened. So I'd ask my colleague two things. Is there anything that might be relevant about this in this second study? And does she want the minister to...
Nothing will change as long as the men who have perpetrated this type of abuse and the people who have stood idly by and watched it, knowing full well what is happening, are allowed to have continued employment. They need to clean house across every place that this has happened, everybody that knew about it, and there needs to be no quarter.